Welcome to the Humble Hoof podcast. My name is Alicia Harlov. This is a podcast for both horse owners and hoof care professionals, offering discussions into various philosophies on the health of the hoof and soundness of your horse. Please check us out on Facebook or at thehumblehoof.com. A special thank you to our wonderful sponsor, Cavallo. For our Humble Hoof listeners, they are offering 15% off their Cavallo Trek hoof boots using the coupon code HRN at checkout. The Trek is the world's most popular and versatile hoof boot and Cavallo's toughest trail boot, while also doubling as an option for therapy or rehab. The front closure system makes it easily adaptable to various hoof shapes, and TPU upper design allows for maximum strength while minimizing weight for the comfort and ease of movement for your horse. These are recommended by vets and trainers and also loved as transport boots by barrel racers, show jumpers, dressage riders, and everyone in between. Again, for 15% off a pair of Treks, use the code HRN at checkout at cavallo-inc.com. I want to give a huge shout out to Custom Equine Nutrition, who is one of our sponsors for our Humble Hoof Podiatry Clinic in October 2025, which, by the way, is currently full, but we do have a wait list if you want to be added. Custom Equine Nutrition is the staple of our nutrition program here at our rehab facility. We regularly test our hay and we seek to balance our mineral supplementation to what's deficient in the hay test. And time and again, Custom Equine Nutrition comes through with their Vermont blend, and I order their extra copper and zinc blend to just increase those levels a little bit from what's in the Vermont blend. The change in their hooves has been incredible. I have seen better hoof wall quality, healthier frogs, better sole quality, and healthier white line connection, and a reduction in event lines just from us monitoring the nutrient values in the hay and making sure that the minerals that we are providing is making up for what the hay is lacking. Nicole over at Custom Equine has been a huge supporter of all things hoof related and soundness related, and I am so glad that they are a sponsor for our event. You can check out customequinenutrition.com. You can also use the code HUMBLEHOOF to get 5% off your order. A few days ago, I saw a post from the Plaid Horse magazine about weight on ponies and how one farm was actually regularly weighing their ponies just to monitor their weight fluctuations throughout the year. I thought this was super interesting because here at my rehab facility, I see horses that go through various weight changes, and I've seen changes in their soundness based on that. So I reached out to Emily Elek, who is the trainer who was interviewed for that post for the Plaid Horse, and asked her to chat with me about that scale that she has in her farm and what she sees in terms of performance with the ponies as she watches their weight and the changes that come throughout the year. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your role in the professional equine world and what you do now and sort of your interest in, the weight of the horses in your program?
Sure. So I am a professional hunter-jumper trainer. My focus is primarily on hunter ponies, or almost exclusively on hunter ponies. I do a lot of sales and leasing. So in that situation, horses come in and leave, fairly frequently. Some are in training and stay a little longer. But with most of my equines being ponies, I've been, very cognizant and aware of their weight as it relates to health and metabolic challenges. I get a lot of ponies in that I think are overweight. We already do routine metabolic testing every year, and I write it into my leases that if the pony is gone for a year, I want an annual metabolic panel done on the pony just to try and stay ahead of, blood sugar levels, insulin level. Are they getting too heavy, and are we at a higher risk for laminitis? So that's kind of been my main concern with the handful of horses we have in the program. Several of them are, teenagers or older. They're all warm bloods. And I find the warm bloods kind of tend to have a similar metabolism to the ponies where they put on extra weight easily. It can be a little bit hard to get them to shed the pounds. And I kind of find as horses get older, that little extra weight can lead to extra stress on their joints and tendons, soft tissue. So we're just kind of trying to stay on top of that with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I've always thought about in terms of, I don't plan to ever lease my horses out. They're not performance horses. I just have them to, leisurely ride on, and one's retired. But I've thought that when I see ads for horses that are leased out, and I'm such a stickler about diet and management because I see what happens to hooves when, horses don't eat appropriately for their body type, that, how do you prevent these new homes or these owners that are temporarily caring for these horses, how do you prevent them from doing something that could be detrimental to their health or their feet? So do you have some sort of like, do you talk to them about diet or management if you're worried about metabolic issues in these ponies?
Yes, and I try to, and I think probably the hardest thing to account for when horses are moving around the country, or even just from program to program, is hay quality and how they're feeding the hay. I can specify what kind of concentrates they get, or no grain, or the supplements they're on. Several of my older ponies have ended up on insulin wise. And sometimes you have cases of Cushing, so they go on Presend. So that usually gets written into the lease that those specific things are taken care of. I'll sometimes write in, grass hay in a hay net, slow feed hay net. But again, like that can even be tricky because grass hay can really vary, one cutting to next. So if I'm concerned, a lot of times I'll say, just flat out soak the hay because then you're cutting down the sugars. But it sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes they come back inflamed or in a little bit of a scary place. So
Yeah.
that can be hard when they come back and you go, ooh, this one has been trying to tell us something for a while and it maybe got missed.
Right. So in terms of your management at home, how do you typically care for these horses? I know that you're talking about the hay and you mentioned it a little
Yep.
bit with like the feed and the percent. But did I hear that you actually cut your own hay?
We have about 20 acres that my husband round bales. And yeah, he is so this has been our little system in trying to find and create lower sugar grass hay. That first cutting, is great, tends to be lower in sugar. We do test all of our hay. But what we've found is a lot of times in the spring in Wisconsin, it's questionably wet. He will oftentimes let that first cutting get rained on. And then he goes back and uses the tedder to fluff it and make sure it's dry. And then we round bale it. And that is our like super diet hay
Yeah.
that we feed to our kind of borderline ponies or the ones that have already had a laminitic episode. And that we find we can feed free choice without any issues.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, netted, but yeah, this has been my challenge, has been how do you keep forage in front of them a lot of the time without them getting too fat or spiking insulin levels. So it with the ponies, it's lower quality forage. Sometimes a little stemmier first cut hay seems to be our best bet. But we do test, most of it to see. And sometimes there are bales or cuttings that because we do have to buy some hay from local farmers that we'll put aside, and those are not for the scary ponies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of, I know that there's kind of a debate between like, do horses or ponies self-regulate if they have hay in front of them all the time? And obviously there are some that just seem like ravenous all the time. Do you find like with the ponies, especially the ones that are more prone to metabolic issues, do you have issues with them just trying to like gorge 24/7?
Yes. And we saw that. So one of the interesting things we started to implement last year, and in some of those graphs that were published in that article, and it's interesting because one of the graphs was three of the big warm blood horses that we do have who were all on the chunky side, even though they were in, fairly regular work. We started mixing and adding straw, clean straw, when they were in the barn. We do a lot of turnout for Hunter Jumper Farm. The horses are either out all day or all night. And in the summer we do night turnout. We kind of found some of these we were really struggling to get the weight off of. We have a treadmill, they were treadmilling regularly. They're getting ridden regularly. So I kind of said, what do we need to do? So we added in straw into their feeders. So they always had something to munch on, but pretty much, a very, very, very low calorie option. And then they would be out at night, either with access to pasture or the netted round baled hay in feeders. So the addition of the straw really, really started to pull the weight off. It took a while, but we actually saw it going into fall where I was like, oh, a few of these I can see a rib or two. Like we need to slowly reintroduce hay, or we started to add alfalfa as a low sugar, extra protein source. We're working on it, always kind of tweaking, but the weight information has been really interesting as we've done this.
Yeah. And I had a question about the straw before we start talking more about like the scale and the weight. So I've never fed straw, but I have clients that do. And do you test it too? Have you tested it?
I have not tested it.
So that's what I was wondering, because I know that some people say that some straw, depending on where it's from, I know there's like barley straw and wheat and oat and all those different kinds, that some can be higher in sugar than they'd expect. And obviously, I think that it's less palatable or digestible in terms of the horses or donkeys or ponies or whatever wanting to eat it. I don't know if that also helps a bit. But
Right.
I've always wondered that. But since I haven't, like, cut the hay ration with straw before, I haven't ever tested it. So I was wondering if,
Right. Right. No, we have not. I mean, and the straw we get does tend to have a little bit of grass mixed into it. And so we feed it in two ways. One is we put it loose in our run-in sheds. And then the other is on these super chunky ones that I'm like, with the hard crests and the fat pads, where I'm like, we've got to get the weight off these suckers. We have corner feeders in their stalls. So when they're in the barn for part of the day, their feeder is filled with straw, and then they get a weight amount of hay. So they're not getting, anything extra. We're trying to be real careful that they're actually getting a reduction in calories and starting to lose weight. And again, that's where the scale has come in really handy, because you can see that from month to month they are in fact dropping weight. So
yeah. So tell me a little bit about how you ended up putting the scale in and where that, started.
I mean, that was 100% my husband, Brian. He's a numbers guy, because I'll come through the barn and say, well, this one's looking a little chubby and I'm a little worried about this. And he's like, well, we don't know. It looks fatter, but is it,
Yeah.
So he's crafty. He built the scale. You'd have to get a hold of him to find out how he did it. But it's about 6 inches off the ground. It's like a low platform. We also have a TheraPlate, so almost all of the horses were comfortable walking and stepping up onto something. But even our young stock, figured it out quickly. So it's got a digital sensor, and you walk the horses across and pause for a minute, and it'll give you a weight reading fairly quickly. And we started entering all that information into a spreadsheet for every horse. And we can then kind of track them month to month if they're long-term residents, and the ones that are leaving and coming back, we know if they've dropped weight on lease or they put on weight on lease. And it can kind of give us some information about how we're going to manage them going forward.
That is really cool. And that's something that I would love to do, honestly, because we have the track system here and they're moving so much. I would love to see, because there are times when I'm like, oh, they look like they're, dropping some weight. And honestly, a lot of the horses that move to my farm initially do drop weight because they're moving so much more than they did before. And it's a little anxiety inducing at first until we figure out exactly what they need.
Exactly.
But yeah, so that's really interesting. Do you have, I mean, obviously every horse and every pony is an individual, but do you see any consistencies or like patterns with management and care and horses coming back from lease or anything like that with the scale?
So I would say one of the most interesting things we saw was we actually saw the horses dropping weight when they went out on pasture for the summer.
Wow.
And yeah, you wouldn't think that, but it is not, super lush. We let it the grass get fairly tall before we let them out, almost to where it could have been a first cutting of hay.
Yeah.
So I think that slows them down a little bit. So they didn't start on full pasture. And when I say full pasture, it's, again, half a day. So some of the groups out at night, some during the day, but they're moving a lot, typically don't use fly sheets. So I let the bugs move them a little bit. We are in a fairly wet area. So when it does rain, it gets a little swampy, and we have some marshy areas up the road. So we can have some mosquitoes, but they're not necessarily standing and grazing peacefully all night. They're moving around. So we've kind of noticed that. But so that was interesting to see that you would think on pasture they would kind of explode, but we didn't see that. And this is the first winter we've gone through with the scale because historically I found mine were actually putting on a ton of weight in the winter when they were in the smaller dry lots and just standing around eating on the round bales. They all looked chunky coming out of the winter. Workloads were a little decreased, that sort of thing. So I found that really interesting. You kind of think the flip side, if you were, looking at more natural, weight curves. I don't know, but we knock on wood, we didn't struggle with any real laminitis episodes. I have one or two horses that I've just said, you know, cannot handle the grass, so they don't get it. We just noticed, and they're not full blown, but we've noticed changes in their feet and the hoof quality. So we're like, let's just not do it. And they stay managed, just on the hay. And we open up some bigger sand and dirt based paddocks so they can move around a little more in the summer, but still not have access to grass.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's so interesting because I've actually noticed the same here where every winter I'm like, man, my horses look so good. And then in the summer, I'm like, why is everybody looking so homely? And I think I've always attributed it to, horses, I feel like they actually deal with the cold pretty well. And my guys do, I think, conserve energy and don't move as much. But then in the summer, the bugs can just be so annoying to them. And I think it makes them want to eat less. They move more. So it's so funny that I'm like, I've seen the exact same thing and I was wondering if others had seen that. So that's really cool that you actually have the numbers to back that up.
Yeah.
And it's not just like, do they look thinner? Do they look, heavier? So.
Right. And it's a little problematic because, in the summer is kind of our main showing where we're
Right.
trying to keep them looking good. But, no one got to, he looks skinny weight, but it was, maybe we supplemented a little more. And I'm trying to feed a forage-based diet for the majority of these. So being in Wisconsin, we have access to really high quality alfalfa with the dairy industry. So my husband recently sourced alfalfa pellets, 17% protein alfalfa pellets and super sacks. So that's been a fairly economical way to add calories, while staying forage based. Yeah, so that's been interesting. We've been weighing the pellets and using a measured scoop and trying to see on top of that and then see how much weight are we actually putting on them with the changes. So that's kind of where we're heading with this.
Yeah. And historically, I've been a little scared of alfalfa because the ECIR group is, I have seen some horses where they eat some alfalfa and they get footsore, even just a little bit. But I've interviewed so many, nutritionists and vets about this. And it seems like there's obviously so many differing opinions. And I think that my hypothesis, which has no bearing in science, it's just my own thoughts. So there's two things. I think that one, I wonder if how the alfalfa is grown, is it sprayed heavily? I do think that absolutely affects their metabolic health and their gut, just in terms of, because now I buy hay that isn't sprayed and I feel like it's been a huge help, but I don't know. And the other thing, I think gut health, I think if the horse's gut can handle the change in forage or legumes or process things differently, I think that can also affect whether their metabolic state can handle eating that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Have you seen any hoof sensitivity with feeding alfalfa?
I have had a handful that we've played around with it where we thought, ooh, is this causing a problem? But as a whole, right now, I'm not noticing any real issues with that. And at the moment, I don't have anybody severely challenged. I have one that came back that had a little episode in December, came back off lease. They sent it back off lease early because it had an episode in December. They got him stable and sent him home. And then we got another pony back recently that we haven't had since I think 2018 or 2019.
Oh, wow.
And is now an 18-year-old pony and extremely overweight with the hardest crest I've seen in I don't know how long. But is surprisingly moving quite comfortably. So, hopefully we've gotten ahead of that and her x-rays actually look pretty good. So trying to up her movement. She is on the straw diet with managed alfalfa. She was in California and they were feeding her alfalfa as well, but kind of trying to decrease the calories while not adding any sugar to her diet if we can avoid it.
Yeah.
So, and kind of keeping her fingers crossed. She's starting to drop weight and I kind of feel like the crest is getting softer. So,
oh, that's good. And you were saying that you require a metabolic panel every year if they're out on lease?
Yes, I write that into my lease. And typically like I suggest, January, that's when I do it on pretty much I get everyone who's like struggling to maintain a healthy weight, I'll do, and then anything over the age of 10 with the ponies.
Yeah.
That's at my barn. So that's kind of my go-to. And, I'll do the same thing into the lease. So if they're 10, or if it's been one that I've been challenged by, I'll ask them to check in once a year. I do January. Now that they're getting the different values for the ACTH throughout the year, I think that's nice. You can test and have the healthy values.
Like a
We'll do
baseline.
questionable one. Yeah, baseline, exactly. Get a baseline, and then if they're questionable or high, we'll wait 60 or 90 days with diet changes and check in again and
Yeah.
and see where they are. So
So with that one that you were talking about just came back, did they have any red flags throughout the lease with the blood work?
um so that is actually one that we had sold,
Oh,
and
okay.
the owners reached out and wanted to send her back to us, knowing that we would make sure she was, retired appropriately. And they she had had an episode on lease with them as the owners. And they had fairly current, they sent her back with current blood work, which really was not that extreme for how extreme her body condition is.
Wow.
So that's interesting, and it is interesting. The numbers are great, but I think some horses, just like we were talking about with the alfalfa, I think some are sensitive to certain things, and maybe their insulin's not that high, but that's enough for them.
Right.
Um, so yeah.
I mean, technically, like, Dr. Kellen talks about how like fat horses and fat ponies aren't all metabolic. It doesn't necessarily mean so, that could just be one that has extra pounds, but is handling it metabolically somewhat okay. So,
Yeah, yeah. The way she's carrying that fat, though, I'm like, this is not good. This is not good.
right. It doesn't mean you just leave it and do nothing about it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and that can be like a little bit of a fear, is like I would find more my issue where I see more problems, I think, when ponies get leased out is there will be decreasing performance, and the pony will come back because of the decreasing performance, and you get it back and it's overweight or its insulin is through the roof, and you kind of go, this might have something to do with it.
Yeah,
Um,
that's something that I would love to talk a little bit about is if you've seen
right.
a correlation between the weight and their performance. And obviously it sounds like you
Hmm.
have.
Absolutely. I would say, this is going back to like when I first started riding and showing ponies. I mean, I remember, oh, that pony just gets foot sore in the summer. We have to put shoes on it. Or, oh, that one can't walk across the rock. And, in hindsight, a lot of those ponies I rode, and I grew up riding sale ponies and green ponies, that would also go with, oh, she was really spooky at the red flowers, or, oh, she didn't want to jump the oxers this week.
Huh.
Um, and as I've gotten older, a lot of spookiness, a lot of behavior things I correlate with foot soreness, a lot of bad behavior, ponies that land on the backside of the jump and want to put their head down and buck. That can be, I don't want to say common, but that's a misbehavior you hear about a lot. And a lot of those end up being foot sore. The landing hurts.
Yeah.
And whether it's foot sore because of metabolic reasons or otherwise, it's definitely one of the things I want to investigate when foot soreness is present. So, I'd say that's a big thing. I've seen ponies that start, refusing at fences. Again, they're trying to avoid that landing that hurts. Not always, but that's one of the things we want to rule out. Do their front feet hurt? Shortened stride length, ponies that, were covering the jumping line distances easily and suddenly aren't. Might they be footsore?
Yeah.
So those are all kind of things, and I would say those are fairly common performance concerns that come up when they come back off of lease. Or, sometimes people say, yeah, this one was doing the small pony division and now it's ready to step down to do the short stirrup. And I'll get it in and we'll change the farrier work and we'll change the diet a little. And suddenly it looks like it could go back to doing the small ponies again. So
So you do see, that change in management does improve performance again.
yes, not always, but a lot of times. you get their whole body feeling better. And I think a lot of times that starts at the feet. So many things, when they're holding themselves to kind of get off their feet, their necks get tight, their backs get tight, their stifles get sore because of their posture, all of those things. And, sometimes people are treating the symptoms, but the root of it is to me, the diet and exercise levels.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
And it's so funny. And I'm, like I said, I'm just like a backyard trail rider. I'm not in the show world at all. But I have, gone and seen some, like I went to Wellington this winter. And I do think that in the hunters, like the desired look is a little like heftier,
Yes, it is. So there was actually, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on Shannon Pratt Phillips was the name of the researcher who led a group, I believe it was the University of North Carolina. And they did a study at the USCF Pony Finals, I think in 2021 or 2022, where they came in and they did body condition scoring on every pony that walked into the ring for the model. And then they reached out online and they asked people if they'd be willing to participate in the studies. And they came back and did, close-up body condition scoring on the ponies and drew blood samples and ran insulin, ACTH. I believe they gave every pony a CREST score as well. And then you got, a free metabolic panel basically at the end of it.
Wow.
And, but what they found was there were almost no ponies that were below a 6 on a 9-point, the 9-point weight scale or whatever you want to call that, body condition scale. And most of the ponies getting ribbons were a 7 or an 8.
Wow.
Yeah. So like that floored me. And I mean, I can look back at pictures of ponies showing from, 30 years ago, and I don't think we were keeping the ponies as fat. And I think it's dangerous. And I think another thing that came out of that was she sent photos to judges, hunter judges, and asked them to do a BCS score. And, they were calling a 7 a 5.
Oh my goodness.
Like in their mind, that was just fine. That was a healthy weight. So yes, I think that is a problem. I mean, there is this, I think the biggest thing I see is, that desire for that arched, cresty looking neck. And I think that's so dangerous because it takes a long time to create that neck with proper training, especially on, a slighter built animal. But you can get the illusion of that crusty, properly developed neck with a fat pony.
Right.
So,
and I think
yeah.
I think along those same lines too is that you can get the appearance of top line with a fat pony.
Absolutely.
I mean, a fat horse.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. So that's, and that I will admit to this was an interesting thing as we pulled the pounds off of some of these. I was like, oh, that one does not look as good as I thought it did. And that's been a little bit of where we've been wanting to add the alfalfa back in for more protein, because are we giving these, in our quest to get calories off, are we losing the good calories and the good building blocks of muscle? Subjectively, I feel like they're starting to look better as we've increased the alfalfa again.
Well, the protein probably helps,
So this was a little bit of a, I made a mistake in the changing of this program. I think on that level, I went a little too far, put the needle a little too far one way, and now it's building it back. So I'm willing to admit to that.
Yeah, I see similar here. So like I was saying, I get a little nervous when horses move in and they start to lose weight from moving more. But when we see these fatter or heavier horses come in and drop weight, it looks like all of a sudden they're dropping top line, but I think they're just literally losing the weight that was looking like it was top line. And I've started adding in, like similar to alfalfa, I use Sandfoin. I don't know if that's
okay.
Yes. Or Sandfoin.
Yeah. I've read about that. Yep.
Yeah, which is a legume. And I've also done things like pea protein isolate, extra flaxseed. I've done, branched chain amino acids, extra amino acids, just things like that. And the hay that I'm feeding out now tests at between like 10 and 11% protein, which is not super high, but it's good for a first cut. And they have, in nets, they have access to it all the time. And with that, it takes time, but we have hills here that they're walking every day. And I've seen them lose weight, but then slowly build up the top line. Whereas, like you're saying, I feel like some people think if they just have this heavier horse, it looks like it's built. It looks like it has muscle, and it doesn't necessarily.
Absolutely. No. No. And I guess, that is like, it's education and, proper conditioning. And I think that is one of those things is we lose land has been easy to lose. My young professional rider, my assistant who works for me and rides, half of the ponies. I have two young women who ride for me, comes from an eventing background. And she loves when spring hits because she's out there getting the ponies up and down the hills and that movement
Yeah.
and that ability to really get them out and galloping and, working fitness sets and things like that are important to getting the muscle building as well as the weight correct.
Yeah. And do you see, like with the scale, do you see them, like the muscle adds weight too, doesn't it?
Right. Yes, yes. So I mean, I think I've had a couple that I was like I have one pony that I bred that is such an easy keeper, and like you said, his blood work always looks pretty good. But he had a hock injury last August, and he needed to be on very, small, tiny. I don't do stall rest, but I have these medical pens basically with a shed. So, he can be out and see his friends. But he was in like a, 24 by 12 area for a while. Well, that hock healed and he got so heavy. This is a 13 two-hand pony and he was close to 900 pounds.
Wow.
I mean, and he looked like a balloon that was going to pop.
Yeah.
His crest never got hard, but he got huge. So he's back down. I think he's like 815 pounds now that he's back in work and he's getting ridden, 4 or 5 days a week, back out in regular turnout. But then he's been fluctuating up and I'm like, okay, we're for the moment, we're going to just say it's muscle.
Right.
he's still not what I would consider his best weight. I'd like to see him more like, 785, 750, something like that in there is kind of what I'm like, oh, he looks really good, which is still not probably, a 5 on a BCS scale. It's probably a 6, but I can deal with that.
Yeah.
I want to be able to see that he has a hip.
Right.
Smooth line, straight back. So yeah, but he's getting fitter. He can canter longer and not pant. And he's looking better. And the saddle is still fitting the same way and he's wearing the same girth. So we're like, okay, maybe this is turning into muscle.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like a girth can almost be a little bit of like a weight tape almost of,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The two young women who work for me will be like, he's down to a 40-inch. I'm like, woohoo,
Right.
Yay. So
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, those are like some real considerations, I think, especially, and I like I said, I'm not in the show world, but I work on some performance horses and I really think that owners are always looking for ways to improve their performance. And I do think that, making sure that they're fit and not just looking the part, is a big factor.
Absolutely. And they're designed to move a lot. And I think that's hard to replicate, in a lot of modern showing barns. But yeah, I mean, people, and I think the big show barns have access to tools like, Eurosizers and walkers and treadmills and things like that. And that can help. But yeah, like it's kind of finding that balance, like those horses. And I think those horses are the ones that are in danger because, we do have all this new knowledge about ulcers and stomach health and gut health. And, you try to keep hay in front of them all the time and suddenly they're ballooning. And I do think like hay quality. I mean, I think traditionally, horses get the second cutting grass alfalfa mix. That was what all my horses grew up on and what everybody was looking for. I think for some horses, and I think especially as warm bloods compared to the thoroughbred metabolism, it's just too many calories.
Yeah.
So, I think that's what I've seen with our big guys. They're basically giant ponies.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. We have it's sad, but almost all our rehab horses here are warm bloods.
Yeah.
Because for whatever reason they have hoof issues or soft tissue injuries. But like I mentioned, all of them came in and I was like, you are very round because they came from that sort of, yeah.
Yeah, that sort of world. Yeah, the hunter world. I think the hunter world and the dressage world both let him get a little a little on the chunky side. And it's easy for them. And they do look good. They look, they look fat and happy and shiny and all of those things. Almost all of the warm bloods we have are rehabs. We get a lot of horses that, other people have tried to rehab and given up on. And my son's horse and my good friend has a nice horse. They both came from California that with, repetitive soft tissue injuries, they couldn't get right. And both horses got here. We pulled their shoes, turned them out and didn't look at them for 3 to 6 months, basically,
Yeah.
you know, and, they've both come around and been wonderful riding horses with, additional body work and chiropractic and all those things. But I really think the ability to be outside and moving, and also the focus that they are not obese. Like we keep them a little thinner.
Yeah.
I think that's
Absolutely.
less stress on those soft tissues. So
Right. And it might be kind of a hard thing to almost sort of start to change the mind of those in the industry. I think again,
yeah, absolutely,
I'm not,
absolutely.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
I mean, if I can kind of illustrate that because the pony that came back off lease after having the laminitic issue in December, you know, we showed at the pony finals in August, and he scored very low in the model. He was a little on the thin side,
Hmm.
but he had questionable blood work, and I was very cautious with how I was putting weight on him. And this is a pony who in his younger days had scored quite high in the model classes, but I would have said he probably was about a 5. You could see a hip bone, you could see a rib. I didn't think he was unhealthy, but he was definitely on the lighter side. And he was near the bottom of the model class.
Oh, it is.
So he came back heavier than he was when he went out. Is he one of these animals that we're just going to have to keep at that slightly thin weight to keep him healthy?
Right.
It might be, and that's hard.
Yeah. Like I've had some ponies and more like metabolic horses here. And I find here that they are the most sound when I can like see a slight hint of rib in movement. And I think
Absolutely.
a lot of people would see that and be like, oh my goodness, they're emaciated, but they're not. I mean, if they're just standing around, they look great. But when they're moving, it's like, oh, I think I can sort of, but then they're moving beautifully and they're so happy and their personality brightens up.
Yes, then they're willing to go forward, and
Right.
yeah. So I think that is a little bit of a perception change, that you have to make, that healthy is not fat, and we talk about horses a lot, it's fat and shiny, and
Yeah.
do we need to kind of change that language a little bit? And I do think it is interesting. I do think the transition from thoroughbreds as show horses to the warm bloods is part of that, because the ability to make a thoroughbred quote fat and shiny, I think as a whole takes a little more effort in making sure their gut health is perfect. And I just think as a whole that their metabolisms are higher than the warm bloods. They're descended from draft horses, which they're thrifty. Ponies and
Yeah.
draft horses are thrifty, and they were selected for, hundreds of years to be easy keepers because they were work animals.
Right.
You don't want to your inputs into your work animal. It's the economics of farming. So I don't know.
Absolutely.
I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we could talk about this forever because it's a topic that I actually feel pretty passionate about, even though I don't show.
Yes.
But I really appreciate you being willing to talk to me about this. And yeah, and I'll try to link that blog post from the Plaid Horse where you talked about the scale that you have at your farm, because that's really cool. And I think it's really interesting. And honestly, if more farms put that in, that would probably be great.
Yeah, I think it would be really or kind of a neat thing to add in to a lot of places. And it was a couple $100. It was not crazy expensive for him to build it. And yeah, I just think it gives you really good information, and it's nice. We can weigh the hay as well, all those
Oh
things. So
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
I don't know. So yeah, I've enjoyed having it, and it's been great data to have. And we're still building on it. And in a year, I might have some different ideas about how we're going to do this, but it's been helpful and pretty cool. So.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep an eye out for any other information that you share with the data you're getting from that, because I'm really interested.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for being willing to talk.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for having me. I love this stuff.
Yeah, awesome.
So you have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
Bye. I always say that I'm slightly more hoof obsessed than the average person, and chances are, if you're listening to a hoof care podcast, you are too. So we should probably be friends. Feel free to find me on Facebook or email me at thehumblehoof@gmail.com.